The stars had not changed in 500 years. Commander Zorath stood at the viewing port of his ship and watched the distant yellow sun grow larger as they approached. Earth's solar system looked exactly as it had when the Volanthi left centuries ago, but Zorath knew that appearances meant nothing in the vastness of space. He was old by Volanthi standards, nearly 800 years, and he remembered the first expedition to this small blue planet. He had been a junior officer then, young and curious about the primitive species that called themselves humans. The Volanthi had studied them for 3 years, watching their wars and their struggles, their greed and their hatred. The High Council had made its judgment quickly. Humanity was a dying species, so they would destroy themselves within a century, perhaps 2. There was no reason to make contact with creatures who would soon cease to exist. Zorath had agreed with that judgment. He had seen the nuclear weapons, the pollution, the endless conflicts over resources and territory. Humans were violent and short-sighted. They bred too quickly and thought too slowly. Evolution had made a mistake with them. Now he was returning to confirm what everyone already knew. Earth would be a dead world, a cautionary tale for other young species. The Volanthi would document the ruins and move on. But something was wrong. The sensors detected activity long before they reached the inner planets. Ships were moving through the asteroid belt. Large ships, mining vessels, cargo transports, and something that looked disturbingly like military cruisers. Zorath leaned closer to the display and felt a cold sensation spread through his chest. Those ships were human, his second officer. A young female named Kira approached with confusion written across her face. She reported that they were detecting massive energy signatures from Mars. The fourth planet appeared to be fully colonized. Settlements covered nearly 30% of its surface. Zorath said nothing. He simply stared at the data scrolling across his screen. Kira continued her report. Europa, the ice moon of Jupiter, showed signs of extensive development. Titan had atmospheric processors running at full capacity, and Earth itself was surrounded by a network of orbital stations, larger than anything the Volanthi had built in their first 1,000 years of space travel. This was impossible. The models had been clear. Humans should have destroyed themselves by now. Zorath ordered the ship to proceed slowly. He needed to understand what had happened before making contact. For 3 days, they observed from a distance, gathering data and recordings. What they found challenged everything the Volanthi believed about primitive species. On Earth, in a massive underground facility beneath the rebuilt city of New Horizon, Admiral Danny Cole received the alert he had been waiting for his entire career. Alien vessel detected at the edge of the solar system. Configuration matches Volanthi records from 2347. Danny was 63 years old, but medical advances had kept his body strong and his mind sharp. He had spent 40 years in the military, fighting in the colony wars that nearly tore humanity apart before ultimately uniting them. He had lost friends, family, and pieces of himself in those conflicts, but he had never stopped believing that one day aliens would return. He stood in the command center, surrounded by screens, showing every defensive asset humanity possessed. Orbital weapons platforms, stealth destroyers, planetary shields. None of it existed when the Volanthi first visited. Humans had built all of it in 500 years, driven by the memory of being judged and dismissed. Dr. Lily Grant arrived within the hour. She was younger than Danny, only 42, but she was the leading expert on xenobiology in the entire human civilization. Her grandmother had been one of the scientists who studied the recordings from the first Volanthi visit. Lily had grown up watching those images, seeing the tall gray aliens look at humanity with cold eyes and colder judgment. She asked Danny what the aliens were doing. Danny told her they were watching, learning, probably trying to figure out how humans were still alive. Lily smiled at that. She had always believed that humanity would surprise the universe. Now she would get to see it happen. The Volanthi ship finally sent a communication request on the 4th day. Commander Zorath appeared on the screen, his gray face carefully neutral. But Danny could see the confusion in his large, dark eyes. Zorath spoke in perfect English. Learned from 500 years of intercepted radio transmissions, he stated. that the Velanthi Consortium wished to establish formal contact with the human species. He requested permission to send a delegation to the planet's surface. Danny considered the request. Part of him wanted to refuse, to make the aliens feel the same dismissal they had shown humanity centuries ago. But that was not the human way. They had learned, through blood and tears, that holding on to anger only led to destruction. He granted permission. The aliens could land at the designated coordinates outside New Horizon. They would be received with appropriate ceremony. Zorath ended the transmission without another word. He turned to Kira and told her to prepare the landing craft. He also ordered her to activate all defensive systems and keep the main ship ready for immediate departure. Kira asked if he expected trouble. Zorath looked at the blue and green planet growing larger in the viewport. He said he did not know what to expect anymore. The landing craft descended through Earth's atmosphere and touched down on a platform surrounded by towering buildings that reached toward the clouds. Zorath stepped out first, followed by Kira and 4 guards. The air was clean, cleaner than it had been 500 years ago. The cities showed no signs of decay or war damage. Everything was new and strong and alive. A human delegation waited for them at the edge of the platform. Admiral Danny Cole stood at the front, wearing a uniform decorated with medals from conflicts the Velanthi knew nothing about. Beside him stood Dr. Lily Grant, her eyes bright with scientific curiosity. Zorath approached slowly, studying these creatures he had dismissed as doomed. They did not bow or tremble. They did not beg for knowledge or protection. They simply stood. They're straight-backed and proud, waiting for him to speak first. He had prepared a speech about Velanthi's superiority and the generosity of their return visit. But looking at these humans, at the civilization they had built against all odds, the words felt hollow and foolish. Instead, he simply introduced himself. And said he wished to understand how humanity had survived. Danny Cole smiled, an expression that Zorath could not quite interpret. The Admiral said that was a long story and invited Zorath to walk with them. He promised the Velanthi would see everything they needed to see. As they walked into the gleaming city, Zorath realized that the Velanthi had made a terrible mistake 500 years ago. They had looked at humanity and seen only weakness. They had never considered that weakness could become strength, that failure could become determination, that a species facing extinction might simply refuse to die. He had come expecting to document ruins. Instead, he found himself walking among giants. The tour of human civilization began the next morning. Commander Zorath had spent the night in a guest facility that was comfortable and elegant. Far beyond what he expected from a species the Velanthi had dismissed as primitive. The bed adjusted to his body temperature automatically. The walls displayed calming images of forests and oceans. A small device provided food that matched Velanthi dietary needs perfectly. Humans had clearly studied the old records from the first contact. They had prepared for this moment. Dr. Lily Grant arrived early to serve as his guide. She was joined by a younger Velanthi scientist named Mira, who had requested permission to accompany the ground team. Mira was curious about everything. Asked questions constantly, her large eyes taking in every detail of the human world. Zorath found her enthusiasm slightly annoying, but he allowed her to stay. Perhaps her fresh perspective would notice things his older eyes might miss. The first stop was an orbital agricultural station. Shuttle carried them up through the atmosphere and docked with a massive ring-shaped structure that circled the planet. Inside, Zorath found himself standing in fields of golden wheat that stretched 4 kilometers under artificial sunlight. Lily explained that these stations produced enough food to feed 20 billion people. Earth's population had stabilized at 12 billion, but the extra capacity was sent to the colonies on Mars, Europa, and Titan. No human went hungry anymore. They had solved that problem 3 centuries ago. Myra asked how they had built such massive structures. The engineering was remarkable, far beyond what the Velanthi had achieved at a similar point in their development. Lily smiled and said necessity was a powerful teacher. When your species faces extinction, you learn quickly or you die. Humans chose to learn. The tour continued to a medical facility in New Horizon. Zorath watched as doctors used nanotechnology to repair a patient's damaged heart in minutes. He saw children being vaccinated against diseases that had once killed millions. He learned that the average human lifespan had extended to 200 years, with some individuals living even longer through advanced treatments. Myra was fascinated by the medical achievements, but she was more interested in something else. She asked Lily a question that had been bothering her since they arrived. How did humanity survive? Every model, every simulation the Volanthi had run predicted human extinction. Their wars, their environmental destruction, their inability to cooperate, all of it pointed toward a species that would destroy itself. Lily considered the question carefully before answering. She said that humans were stubborn. They did not accept death easily. When faced with extinction, they fought back with everything they had. Zorath asked what that meant in practical terms. Lily explained that after the Volanthi left, humanity went through its darkest period. The resource wars killed 4 billion people. Nuclear weapons destroyed entire cities. The environment collapsed in many regions. For 50 years it seemed like the Volanthi predictions would come true. But then something changed. The survivors looked at the ruins of their civilization and made a choice. They decided that the old ways of thinking, the nationalism, the tribalism, the endless competition for resources, all of it had to end. They built something new from the ashes. Mira asked if it had been difficult. Lily laughed softly. She said it was the hardest thing humanity ever did. Millions more died in the transition period. Old powers fought against the change. But eventually, the United Earth government emerged, and with it, a new purpose. Humanity would survive. Humanity would reach the stars. Humanity would never again be dismissed as primitive. The afternoon brought a meeting that Zorath had been dreading. He was taken to the Global Defense Command, where Admiral Danny Cole and Commander Jake Morris waited in a secure briefing room. Jake was a large man with scars on his face and hands, a soldier who had fought in conflicts across 3 worlds. He did not smile when the Volanthi entered. Danny invited everyone to sit. The conversation began pleasantly enough, with discussions of trade possibilities and cultural exchange. But eventually Zorath asked the question that the Volanthi High Council needed answered. He wanted to know how humanity had developed faster than light travel. The physics were incredibly complex. Only a handful of species in the known galaxy had achieved it. The Volanthi had assumed humans were centuries away from such discoveries. Jake leaned forward with a hard expression. He said humans had figured it out because they had no choice. After the Volanthi left, humanity knew they were being watched and judged. They knew that other species in the galaxy saw them as primitives. So they worked harder. They pushed their scientists further. They invested everything in space technology because space was the only future that mattered. Zorath pressed further. He asked about the military vessels they had detected in the outer system. Why did humans need warships if they had achieved peace among themselves? Danny answered that question. He said humans had learned a painful lesson from history. Peace required strength. They would never again be caught unprepared, never again be vulnerable to those who might see them as weak. The message was clear, even if it was not spoken directly. Humans were not afraid of the Volanthi. They were not asking for protection or guidance. They were equals now, and they expected to be treated as such. Zorath felt something shift inside him. For 800 years, he had believed in Volanthi superiority. His species had traveled the stars for millennia. They had guided younger civilizations and watched countless others destroy themselves. They were wise and ancient and powerful, but these humans, these stubborn, violent, primitive humans, had done something remarkable. In just 500 years, they had transformed themselves from a dying species into a force that could not be ignored. As the meeting ended, Mira approached Lily with another question. She asked if humans ever thought about giving up during the dark years. If extinction seemed inevitable, why did they keep fighting? Lily thought about it for a moment. Then she said that giving up was not in human nature. Even when everything seemed hopeless, there was always someone who refused to accept defeat. One person who kept working, kept fighting, kept believing, and that one person inspired another and another. until the impossible became possible. Mira nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand something important. The Volanthi measured species by their technology and their social structures. They looked at data and made predictions, but they never accounted for something that could not be measured. They never considered the power of will. Zorath walked beside her in silence as they returned to their quarters. He was thinking about his report to the High Council. He had been sent to document the death of a species. Instead, he would have to explain how that species had become something the Volanthi had not seen in 10,000 years. Arrival. The thought was disturbing. But as he looked at the gleaming towers of New Horizon and the busy streets filled with confident humans, Zorath could not deny the truth. Everything the Volanthi believed about humanity was wrong. The Volanthi delegation made an unusual request on the third day of their visit. Commander Zorath asked for access to human historical archives. He wanted to understand the 500 years they had missed, to see for himself how a doomed species had transformed into a galactic power. The Human Council debated the request for several hours. Some argued that sharing their history would reveal weaknesses the Volanthi could exploit. Others believed that transparency was the best path forward. In the end, they agreed to grant limited access under careful supervision. A young historian named Ben Price was assigned to guide the Volanthi through the records. Ben was 31 years old, with brown hair and curious eyes that reminded Mira of a child discovering the world for the first time. He worked at the Central Archive in New Horizon, a massive digital library that contained every document, video, and recording from human history. Mira requested to be the Volanthi representative for this task. Zorath agreed, happy to focus on more practical matters while she handled the academic work. He did not realize that this decision would change everything. Ben led Mira into a viewing chamber deep within the archive building. The walls were covered with screens that could display any moment from human history in perfect detail. He asked her where she wanted to begin. Mira said she wanted to see everything. From the day the Volanthi left to the present moment, she wanted to understand how humanity had survived. Ben nodded and activated the first recording. The screen filled with images of Earth in the year 2350, just 3 years after the Volanthi departure. Wars raged across every continent. Nuclear explosions lit up the night sky. Millions of refugees fled from cities that had become death traps. Mira watched in horrified fascination. This was worse than the Volanthi models had predicted. Humanity was not just declining. They were actively destroying themselves. Ben explained that this period was called the Resource Wars. Clean water, fertile land, and energy reserves had become increasingly scarce. Nations fought each other for survival. Old alliances collapsed. New enemies emerged every day. The recordings showed battle after battle. Soldiers fought with weapons that burned through armor like paper. Civilians died in the crossfire or starved in the ruins of their homes. Children wandered through rubble, searching for parents who would never return. Mira asked,
Ow.
"How many people died during this period?" Ben's voice was quiet when he answered, 4 billion. Nearly half the human population at the time. It was the greatest catastrophe in their history. But then the recordings began to change. The wars continued, but something new appeared in the chaos. Leaders emerged who spoke of unity instead of victory. President Carla Reyes of the American coalition stood in the ruins of a bombed city and called for peace. Chancellor Tony Schultz of the European Collective risked his life to negotiate ceasefires. Hundreds of smaller figures, governors and generals and ordinary citizens, began pushing back against the madness. Ben fast-forwarded through decades of struggle. Mira watched as humanity slowly, painfully, began to rebuild. The United Earth government formed from the ashes of the old nations. Resources were pooled and shared. Scientists from former enemy countries worked together on solutions to the environmental collapse. It was not a smooth transition. There were setbacks, rebellions, and moments when everything nearly fell apart again. But humanity kept moving forward, step by stubborn step. Mira asked Ben why they kept going. When everything seemed hopeless, when the evidence suggested extinction was inevitable, what made them continue? Ben thought about the question for a long moment. Then he told her about his great-grandmother, a woman named Nina Price. She was a biologist who volunteered for the first Mars expedition in 2412. The mission was, with only a 40% chance of survival, the ships were held together with hope and whatever materials could be salvaged from the war years. Nina knew she might die. She went anyway. The recording showed her final message before departure. She spoke directly to the camera, her eyes bright with determination. She said she was going to Mars because someone had to be first. Someone had to prove that humanity could reach beyond their wounded planet. If she died, others would follow. They would learn from her mistakes and do better. That was how progress worked. Nina died 2 years later when a dust storm collapsed her research station. But the colony survived. Her sacrifice, and the sacrifices of thousands like her, built the foundation for the civilization that now stretched across the solar system. Mira felt something she had never experienced before. It was a heavy feeling in her chest, an ache that seemed connected to the images on the screen. She asked Ben what this feeling was. He said it was probably grief. Humans felt it when they remembered those who had died. But there was something else mixed in, something humans called pride. It was the feeling of belonging to something larger than yourself, being part of a story that continued across generations. The recordings continued. Mira watched the founding of New Mars, the construction of the Europa ice mines, the first successful faster-than-light test flight. Each achievement was built on the bones of those who came before. Each victory carried the weight of countless defeats. By the time they finished, Mira understood something fundamental about humanity. The Valanthi had measured their potential using equations and probability models. They had calculated the likelihood of survival based on technology and social development. But they had missed the most important variable. Humans did not just survive. They remembered. Every death, every sacrifice, every moment of suffering was preserved and passed down to the next generation. The weight of their ancestors drove them forward. They carried their dead with them into the future. Ben turned off the final recording and looked at Mira. He asked if she had learned what she wanted to know. Mira nodded slowly. She said she understood now why the Valanthi predictions failed. They had treated humanity as a species that existed only in the present moment. They never considered that humans were connected to their past and their future in ways that could not be measured. Ben smiled at that. He said every human child learned the same lesson growing up. You are not alone. You are part of a chain that stretches back thousands of years and forward into eternity. Your ancestors struggled so that you could live. Your job is to struggle so that your descendants can live better. Mira left the archive that evening with a new perspective. She found Zorath in his quarters, reviewing data on his tablet. She told him they needed to talk. Zorath looked up with mild irritation. He asked what was so important that it could not wait until morning. Mira said that everything that Valanthi believed about humanity was wrong. They had made a terrible mistake 500 years ago, and if they were not careful, they would make an even worse one now. Zorath put down his tablet and listened. For the first time since arriving on Earth, he began to feel afraid. Commander Zorath sent his preliminary report to the Valanthi High Council. 3 days after Mira's visit to the archives, he transmitted his findings via subspace communication from the orbiting ship, ensuring the message would reach the council chambers within hours, despite the vast distance. The report was thorough and honest. Zorath described human technological achievements, their military capabilities, their unified government, and their colonization of multiple worlds. He noted that humanity had surpassed Valanthi development rates at comparable stages. He concluded that humans were no longer a primitive species. They were a peer civilization, possibly even a potential rival for galactic influence. The council's response came faster than expected. Zorath read it alone in his quarters, his gray face growing paler with each line. Some council members demanded immediate action. They argued that humanity represented a threat to Valanthi dominance. The humans had developed too quickly, achieved too much. If left unchecked, they might eventually challenge Valanthi authority in the Galactic Consortium. Better to deal with the problem now, while humans were still confined to a single solar system. Other council members urged caution. They pointed out that humanity had done nothing aggressive. Starting a conflict could be costly and might turn other species against the Volanthi. They recommended continued observation and diplomatic engagement. The final decision fell to Zoroth. He was ordered to probe for weaknesses, find vulnerabilities that could be exploited if military action became necessary, identify divisions in human society that might be used to destabilize their government. Zorath closed the transmission and sat in silence for a long time. He thought about what Mira had told him, about the archives she had seen, about the impossible journey humanity had taken. He thought about Admiral Danny Cole's calm confidence and the scars on Commander Jake Morris's face. These were not people who would be easily intimidated or manipulated, but orders were orders. Zorath began planning his next moves. Mira, meanwhile, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with her role in the delegation. She had spent more time with Dr. Lily Grant, learning about human culture and history. She had walked through the streets of New Horizon, watching families go about their daily lives. She had seen children playing in parks built on the ruins of ancient battlefields. These were not the primitive savages the Valenthea records described. These were people with hopes and dreams, fears and loves, just like her own species. The thought of her government planning action against them made her stomach turn. She made a decision that would change everything. Late one evening, Mira contacted Lily and asked to meet privately. They found a quiet garden on the outskirts of the city, far from listening devices and prying eyes. Mira spoke quickly, her words tumbling out in a rush of fear and determination. She told Lily about the High Council's response. She explained that some members wanted to take preemptive action against humanity. She warned that Zorath had been ordered to find weaknesses. Lily listened without interruption. When Mira finished, she asked why the young Volanthi was sharing this information. Mira said she could not stand by, watch innocent people be harmed. She had seen too much of human history, too much of their struggle and sacrifice. She believed there had to be another way. Lily thanked her for the warning. Then she contacted Admiral Danny Cole. Within hours, a secret meeting was convened in a secure facility beneath the Global Defense Command. Admiral Cole, Commander Jake Morris, and a new arrival named Ambassador Kate Stellivan sat across from Dr. Lily Grant as she relayed Mira's intelligence. Kate Sullivan was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She had spent decades handling delicate negotiations between human colonies. Her skills had prevented 3 civil wars and resolved countless disputes. This was her greatest challenge yet. Jake Morris wanted to mobilize the fleet immediately. He argued that if the Valenthi were probing for weaknesses, humanity should show them strength. Put every warship on patrol. Activate the planetary defense grid. Make it clear that any attack would be met with devastating retaliation. Danny Cole shook his head. He said that showing force might provoke exactly the response they wanted to avoid. The Volanthi were looking for evidence that humanity was aggressive and dangerous. Mobilizing the military would give them that evidence. Kate offered a different approach. She proposed transparency. Instead of hiding human capabilities, they would reveal them openly, not as a threat, but as an invitation. Show the Volanthi everything, the technology, the colonies, the history. Let them see humanity as partners rather than rivals, Lily agreed. She said that Mira had proven not all Volanthi wanted conflict. There must be others who felt the same way. By demonstrating good faith, humanity could strengthen the position of those who advocated for peace. Admiral Cole considered the options carefully. He had spent his life preparing to defend humanity against external threats. Every instinct told him to fight, to prove that humans could not be pushed around. But he had also learned that true strength came from knowing when not to fight. He approved Kate's plan the next day. Invitation was sent to Commander Zoroth. The Human Council wished to address the Volanthi delegation at a special assembly aboard Unity Station, the massive orbital platform that served as humanity's governmental seat. Representatives from every colony would attend. The entire human civilization would speak with one voice. Zoroth accepted the invitation. Curious about what the humans intended, the assembly hall was enormous, capable of holding 10,000 people. When Zoroth and Mira entered, they found every seat filled. Delegates from Earth, Mars, Europa, Titan, and dozens of smaller settlements sat together in perfect silence. All eyes turned to the Valenthi visitors. Admiral Danny Cole stood at the central podium. He began speaking without notes, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. He talked about human history, not the sanitized version, but the truth. He spoke of the wars, the genocides, the environmental destruction. He acknowledged the billions who died because of human failures. He did not make excuses or shift blame, but then he spoke of what came after. The survivors who refused to give up, the leaders who chose unity over power, the ordinary people who rebuilt their world one brick at a time. He spoke of scientists working through the night, soldiers holding the line against chaos, mothers raising children in the ruins of cities. He spoke of stubborn, impossible, beautiful hope. Humanity was not perfect, he said. They had made terrible mistakes and would probably make more. But they had learned something in their journey from extinction. They learned that survival required cooperation, not domination. They learned that true strength came from lifting others up, not pushing them down. He looked directly at Zoroth as he finished. Humanity was not asking for permission to exist. They would defend themselves if necessary, but they preferred to build bridges rather than walls. They were offering friendship to any who would accept it. The chamber erupted in applause. Zoroth sat in stunned silence, unable to process what he had witnessed. For the first time in his 800 years, he felt something he had never experienced when dealing with lesser species. Respect. The Valanthi. High Council received Commander Zoroth's updated report 2 weeks after the Unity Station assembly. It was accompanied by hours of recordings, detailed analysis, a personal recommendation that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Zoroth argued against military action. He explained that humanity had achieved something remarkable, something the Valanthi had never seen in 10,000 years of galactic observation. They had faced extinction and emerged stronger. They had unified not through conquest, but through shared suffering. They had built a civilization on the foundation of stubbornness and hope. More importantly, he noted that attacking humanity would be catastrophic. Their military technology was advanced, and their resolve was absolute. The Valanthia might eventually win such a conflict, but the cost would be devastating. And the other species in the Galactic Consortium would question whether the Valanthia could be trusted. The Council debated for 3 days. Hawks argued that humanity's rapid development made them dangerous. Moderates countered that the same development made them valuable allies. In the end, the decision came down to a simple calculation. The risks of conflict outweighed the potential benefits. The Valanthi would extend an invitation. Humanity would be offered a place in the Galactic Consortium. Commander Zoroth delivered the news personally to Ambassador Kate Sullivan in a formal ceremony at Unity Station. The chamber was filled with the same delegates who had heard Admiral Cole's speech 2 weeks earlier. This time, they sat in hopeful silence, waiting to hear what the alien commander would say. Zoroth stood at the podium, his tall gray form illuminated by a spotlight. He began by acknowledging the history between their species. He admitted that the Valanthi had judged humanity unfairly 500 years ago. They had looked at a young civilization struggling with its worst impulses and assumed they knew the entire story. They were wrong. Humanity had proven something that contradicted every Valanthi model and prediction. They had shown that a species could change, that destruction was not inevitable, that the worst chapters of a civilization's history did not have to be the final ones. On behalf of the Valanthi, High Council, and the Galactic Consortium, Zoroth formally invited humanity to join the alliance of advanced civilizations that govern much of the known galaxy. They would have full rights and responsibilities, a voice in council decisions, and access to the vast resources and knowledge of thousands of worlds. The chamber exploded with cheers. Delegates embraced each other, some with tears streaming down their faces. This was the moment humanity had dreamed of since they first looked up at the stars and wondered if they were. Alone, Ambassador Kate Sullivan stepped forward to respond. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of centuries of struggle. She accepted the invitation on behalf of humanity. They were honored to join the Galactic Consortium and looked forward to contributing to its continued prosperity. But she made one thing clear. Humanity would join as equals. They would not bow or scrape. They would not apologize for surviving. Zorath nodded slowly. He understood. In truth, he would have been disappointed if she had said anything different. The days that followed were filled with negotiations, treaties, and ceremonies. Details needed to be worked out about trade, borders, technology sharing, and diplomatic protocols. It would take years to fully integrate humanity into the galactic community, but the first step had been taken. Mira requested a permanent posting as the Velanthi, liaison to Earth. Her request was granted without debate. She had proven herself invaluable during the negotiations, bridging the gap between species with her understanding of human history and culture. On her last evening before assuming her new role, Mira met with Lily and Ben in the same garden where she had first revealed the Council's deliberations. The sun was setting over a new horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Lily asked Mira why she wanted to stay. She could return to her homeworld as a hero, celebrated for her role in the historic agreement. Mira thought about the question for a long moment. Then she said she wanted to learn more. She wanted to truly understand how a species could defy every prediction and emerge stronger. The archives had shown her the facts, but understanding required more than facts. It required experience. Ben smiled at that. He said, humans spent their entire lives trying to understand themselves. Mira would fit right in. Lily added something that would stay with Mira for the rest of her long life. She said that humans were not defined by their worst moments. They were defined by what they did after. Every time they fell, they got back up. Every time they failed, they tried again. That was the secret the Velanthi had missed. That was why humanity was never truly gone. Admiral Danny Cole stood alone on the observation deck of Unity Station, watching the Velanthi diplomatic ship prepare for departure. The vessel would carry Zorath and most of the original delegation back to the Consortium homeworld. Only Mira would remain. Footsteps approached from behind. Danny turned to see his granddaughter, Sophie Cole, walking toward him. She was 18 years old, a cadet in the Defense Academy. With her grandfather's sharp eyes and her grandmother's gentle smile, Sophie asked what he was thinking about. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he told her about his grandmother, a woman who had survived the resource wars as a child. She used to tell him stories about hiding in basements while bombs fell, about eating whatever could be scavenged from the ruins, about watching friends and family die from disease and violence. But she also told him about the people who helped each other, the strangers who shared their last scraps of food, the soldiers who protected refugees instead of following orders, the doctors who worked without sleep to save anyone they could. That was humanity, Danny said. The darkness and the light all tangled together. The Velanthi saw the darkness and assumed it would win. They did not understand that humans were always fighting a war inside themselves. And somehow, against all odds, the light kept winning. Sophie asked if he thought the aliens would ever truly understand humans. Danny smiled and put his arm around her shoulders. Maybe not, he said, but that was okay. Humanity did not need to be understood. They only needed to endure. The Velanthi ship lifted off and accelerated toward the stars. Danny and Sophie watched until it disappeared into the darkness of space behind them. The lights of Unity Station blazed with activity. Delegates from 100 worlds were already planning the future, negotiating treaties, building alliances. The work of civilization continued, just as it had continued through wars and plagues and every catastrophe humanity had faced. A new chapter was beginning. The universe was vast and full of wonders, dangers, and possibilities beyond imagination. Humanity would face challenges that made the resource wars look like a minor disagreement. They would fall and fail and suffer, just as they always had. But they would also rise. They would build and create and dream. They would carry their ancestors with them into the future and make sacrifices for descendants who would never meet, because that was what humans did. That was who they were. Not a species defined by their technology or their conflicts, but by their stubborn, irrational, beautiful refusal to give up. The legacy continued. and it always would.